Now for something completely different. So anyone who has explored the depths of my channel at this point knows that the Shedding Tears videos are actually an old format from when I didn't really know what to do with the content on my channel. I mean, I still don't really know what to do with the content on my channel, but I kind of have a pattern of content at this point. But way back, I did what was called a recommendation review. Basically, when I was working out and swimming on a regular basis down at the YMCA down by my mom's, there was a gentleman who would swim laps in the pool fairly regularly, and I was friends with him, and he would recommend me movies to watch. And through the power of very legal movie streaming sites such as 123 Movies, due to certain websites, I'm able to watch the movies on my PC and kind of go through them and review them. The first movie I did a review video for was The Bone Collector, starring Angelina Jolie and Denzel Washington. Obviously, it wasn't edited in the same style as this video will be, but I had a few movie recommendations still left in my movie recommendation and review master Microsoft Word document that I keep on my PC that holds all of my thoughts and notes about all of the movies that I've been recommended. And I figured I'd watch the next one, you know, kind of chop down the list of recommendations I have, because the last three that I had in the document have literally been sitting in it for like 2+ years at this point. And I figured I might as well squeeze another YouTube video out of the review process in the process of doing so. So, what film am I reviewing? Today I will be talking about the film Thief, starring James Caan and Jim Belushi, and directed by director Michael Mann. And Thief was released in 1981. Now, I'm going to try and give you guys kind of a synopsis and review, and then I will pop this guy up on the screen when I start getting into hyper specifics and spoiler stuff. But for the moment, don't worry about that. So the basic story of Thief is that this successful guy who has like his own car dealership, you know, dresses nice, he's actually a thief slash professional score taker, and this movie kind of follows the developments in his personal life and obviously the developments in his criminal enterprise and kind of what that leads to and kind of how it affects the goals that he has for his own life and what it does to him in the process. I don't want to be so bold as to say that Grand Theft Auto 5 was directly inspired by it, but this film was recommended to me by my cousin Ben. Shout out to you, Ben. And he recommended it to me after I had finished watching the film Heat, starring Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. And if you've watched Heat, you know that that movie was damn near the blueprint for the story of Grand Theft Auto 5. And there were pieces of this story that kind of reminded me of elements of the story of Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, obviously, GTA 5 was its own story, and, you know, that really goes to show that it's not so much coming up with a totally original, never-before-seen idea, but more so how you can take pieces and parts from other stories and kind of mesh them together to create what is basically a new story. Because even though Heat is basically a blueprint for Grand Theft Auto 5, there were many parts of Thief that reminded me of specific story elements within Grand Theft Auto 5, and to be honest, without giving it away too much, I actually think I preferred Thief to Heat. There's not really a whole lot of action in this film, but as anyone who knows anything about my opinions on filmmaking know, that's not necessarily always necessary for a good film. If anything, I actually prefer that it's more of a character-driven kind of slow roll of a film. Again, without going into spoiler specifics, I do feel like Thief handled the vague concept of juggling multiple storylines and plot threads a lot better than Heat before it. And what I mean by before it is I watched Heat first, and obviously I experienced Grand Theft Auto 5's story before both of them. Thief is the oldest movie of the three stories. So, in general, I feel as though Thief handled its multiple character arcs and story beats very cleanly. There were a lot of moving parts, but it never really felt like there were a lot of moving parts because it was so naturally integrated into the story that never did I go, where the hell is this other part of the plot? What's happening with that right now? Pretty much every setup that the movie makes gets paid off in some form or fashion. I feel as though the intra-criminal relationships in this film are also rather strong because, like I said, I watched Heat directly before this recommendation, so I kind of have a hard time not comparing it to that. Handled the dynamics between the criminal characters with far more grace than Heat did. Now, without going into that too much, Heat had kind of a top work-life balance drama plot line that kind of limited the amount of time they could solely focus on the criminal element, but I never felt like Heat's criminals were nearly as compelling as the criminals in Thief. So make of that what you will. Without directly spilling how the movie ends, I appreciate that the ending is rather ambiguous. And anyone who's seen it will know what I mean by that. It's not particularly clear what happens at the end. And I'm talking like the very end, like closing 30 seconds of the film. So I really appreciate that. It was a very strong decision on the part of the writer and director. And I didn't even check that, but Michael Mann wrote as well as directed. So kudos to him, as well as Frank Hoheimer. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but they both did an excellent job. The story was very tight. There wasn't really any dead plot threads as far as I can recall. And I literally just watched this like 2 hours ago. Also, and this is probably the last part before the spoiler warning begins, but I appreciate that this film, likely due to its age, doesn't really have much of an epilogue. I'm sure there's some film critic people who would probably argue that there is an epilogue and maybe I'm just not reading it as one because I'm a rube. But a lot of movies from the 80s, I'm thinking of RoboCop in particular, which technically came out after this guy because RoboCop came out in 1987 and this came out in 1981. But I just really appreciate that during that time period, it was possible to just end a movie. Like, you don't need to see every single little plot thread and plot detail get touched upon in the ending. And it really opens the door for the audience to get a little bit creative and actually have to think like, I wonder what happened to X, Y, and Z after the story ended. Overall, before I get into spoilers, even though it's a 30-some-year-old movie, I do feel like shielding people from spoilers because my overall score for Michael Mann's Thief is an 8 out of 10. And just to read from my recommendation and movie review score list, this is what defines an 8 out of 10 by my approximation. Quote, solid, memorable films that remain in your conscious. They might fail in that they usually work best in a genre-specific context, but they're well made and recommendable. I can't think of anything in this film that out and out fails, but it is very much a heist movie, so if you're not into heist movies, I'm not really sure if it would appeal to you. But I recommend watching this movie at least once. It's a good time. And even though I personally feel like James Caan does not have the acting power that Robert De Niro or particularly Al Pacino have in, say, Heat, he does a good job and it's enough to recommend the film. Alright, time for the spoilers. This is just probably going to be idea vomit and just thoughts I have off the top of my head. I'm going to read from my recommendation review sheet and just kind of say the things that really stood out. In particular, the romantic subplot, if you can call it that, in Thief was well executed. I really appreciate that both Jesse and Frank are rather shady characters, so they're kind of trying to turn over a new leaf and start freshly, which also leads to the adoption thread of the plot, which I think was also handled particularly well, and it also kind of develops Frank's character because it becomes clear that, his life has not always been peachy keen. He's got a bit of a dark history. That's not exactly the best way to put it, I suppose, but it kind of helps explain why he ended up falling into a father-son relationship with Okla. I will say that Willie Nelson's performance isn't particularly strong, but he also doesn't really seem like a super duper important part of the story. I mean, obviously he's a major motivator for Frank, but the movie obviously doesn't spend too much time with him because he shows up at the beginning and then he doesn't really even do very much before he dies. Like, he's reintroduced into the story and then he dies. I will say Frank doesn't really have much of a reaction to his death. I mean, I guess that is one way to cope with the loss of a father figure, is to kind of just shut down. And I kind of did that myself when my own father died, so maybe I shouldn't criticize it for that. But I don't know, I just felt like Frank's character was kind of going in a more vengeful, destructive expression of that sorrow, which we did kind of get in the film's climax when he goes and kills the mob boss Leo. I don't know if he's actually technically a mob boss, but that's kind of how I remembered him in my head. I'll be honest, Frank is really the only character whose name really stuck with me through the entire runtime. It's not that he was the only good character, but he was the only person whose name really stuck with me. And I guess maybe that makes sense for a movie about criminal activity. But anyway, on to the next point. It definitely felt like Frank's relationship with Jesse inspired the relationship between Michael and Amanda in Grand Theft Auto 5. Maybe I'm just tripping, but it really kind of seemed like that to me. Maybe that's only because I experienced the story of Grand Theft Auto 5 first, but I don't know. I just kind of got that impression. On the point of the relationships between all the criminals, I really appreciated that they didn't really overblow the significance of the relationship between Jim Belushi and Khan's characters. But at the same time, they were developed enough to where you kind of got the impression that these guys have worked together for a long time and they have a repertoire with one another. Also, just a quick sidebar here. I really appreciate that in the 80s, there were always shots of bare tits. And even though you couldn't see it head on in this movie, during the beach scene after the heist, you can tell that Jim Belushi's girlfriend lost her top, and so you don't see her from the front, but you get ample side boob.
Look at that side boob. Check out this side boob.
I will say that the bank heist that occurred right before that, or I guess the safe heist is probably a more accurate description of it. It was portrayed very realistically. It was a very painstaking and arduous task for them to break into that vault, that safe. But I will say it was a little bit, maybe gratuitous is the word. It was really concerned with showing you just how difficult it was to get into that safe, which, in fairness, they did establish before that scene that it was going to be very difficult. But as a viewer, I was just like, okay, come on, like, move it.
Come on. Move it! Could you be any slower?
Also, when that scene ended, I honestly thought the beach scene afterwards, I wasn't looking at the runtime, so I kind of believed for a few minutes. I was like, is the movie just over? I thought maybe the movie was just done. Maybe that was just me being hopeful, because I really wanted Frank to get a happy ending and to just live happily forever after with Jesse and their son David. Which leads me to talk about the villain, Leo. The actor that portrayed Leo, Robert Prosky, he really did a good job of selling this character, because honestly, part of the reason I thought Frank was going to get a happy ending as a character was the fact that I kind of believed that Leo was not going to screw screw Frank over after the heist. Obviously, after the kind of scene where he's like, I don't know if you understand what's going on, it kind of became clear that that wasn't what was going to happen. But Mr. Prosky really did a good job of selling the heel face turn. Maybe it's just my naivete, but I was just hoping, I was like, maybe these guys are just honest to goodness thieves. Like, yeah, they might be on the wrong side of the law, but maybe they won't go there. And that leads me to this next point, which is that this film reminded me that there was a time when villains could just be absolutely ruthless. I won't say it due to the content of what Leo says, but when he threatens Frank and just says, I'm gonna throw your wife out on the street for X, Y, and Z to happen to her, I was like, holy shit, villains in movies can be ruthless when you actually let them be written to be ruthless. And he was like, I basically own that child of yours. Woo! It was heavy. Jim Belushi's character was killed rather flagrantly and suddenly, but I mean, that kind of added to the impact of his death. Because you were like, oh shit, he's dead. And this movie did not shy away from the blood. Like, it wasn't overly gratuitous, but at least when people got shot with shotguns and stuff, there was adequate blood spray, and you were like, yep, he's dead. He's gone. I'll just kind of close the spoiler section here before I conclude and say that I really appreciate that the movie doesn't really clarify whether Frank lived or died. I'll be honest, I probably didn't pay close enough attention to notice when he mentioned or was shown putting on bulletproof armor, because I was kind of surprised. I thought he had died in that moment when the guy shoots him at the end, but he clearly survived, at least long enough to obviously get to the credits rolling. So I'm kind of glad that they never really clarify, you know, maybe he just walked a few more feet after the fade to black and then he dropped dead, or maybe he actually survived. I don't know. And I really appreciate that, because too many movies nowadays will just punch you in the face and just out and out tell you everything. And I actually kind of like that this movie didn't tell me everything, because now I can at least kind of headcanon what I think would have or could have happened to Frank after the movie's conclusion. Anyway, that about does it for today. I don't know how well this review will go over. I know the first review that I did with The Bone Collector had some people disagree with my kind of taste in film, but you're free to do that. I just wanted to throw out another movie review just for a little bit more diversity of content for this channel, because as I've said in the past, I can only do so many writing revisits. The monster manuals for Godzilla Save the Earth are finite in number, so I can only do so many of those, and I can only do so many Shedding Tears videos before the concept kind of runs stale. So just let me know what you guys think, check this movie out, and I will talk to you guys in the next video.